Dave, so good to have you, man. Dave's been a good friend for so long. I know you just moved to Pawleys Island, South Carolina, which is a
We
beautiful
did.
spot. You're golfing this weekend. Tell us about what you do, and then tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah. Live here in Pawleys Island, South Carolina. And 2 weeks ago, we moved here. I am the co-founder of an organization called Clarity House that helps churches and organizations live with clarity as they develop people in a disciple-making kind of framework. We answer five big questions of clarity. What is it that you do? Why do you do it? When are you successful? How do you do it? And where is God taking you next? So spend a lot of time in churches and organizations, really helping them get clarity on that. And then I'm also part of the Grace family of churches, along with you, Ben,
Yep.
helping this great movement of people continue to multiply the kingdom through the work at Grace. So that's a little bit of myself. Married to my wife, Kim, for 27 years, have three kids. One just graduated college from George Washington University, one that is headed to Clemson University next year, and then one who's still got one more year of school left. So,
Love your family, Dave.
yeah.
It's so good to have you. Would you just kind of jump in and start teaching us a little bit about these three drifts and these three temptations, and maybe set it up by just telling us why you think this teaching's so important? I know you've done this all over
Yeah.
the country. You're doing it. You're traveling every week to different places to teach leaders this stuff. Why does this matter so much?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, especially for the audience that we're talking to today, I have a deep belief that as Christians, we should be producing, we should be leading with an unfair advantage. Here's what I mean by that. I think that we should be leaders who are trading in wisdom and power in a world that's trading in knowledge and skill. Like the business world works on knowledge and skill. Knowledge people outsource their skill people, outsource, the knowledge people. And that's the way the business world works. Now, again, I come from a church background. When the business world looks at the church world, they actually see the church world operating in ignorance and incompetence, I think, a lot of times. Right? But as Christians, we should be leading out of wisdom and power. And here's what I mean by that. Wisdom is more than knowledge. Wisdom is knowledge plus experience that's been lived out in life. Power is not the absence of skill, it's skill plus authority that comes from a real sense of identity. You guys were just talking about Scotty Scheffler a second ago. It's amazing when you look at this guy who's overproducing in his field. If you like do the kind of background work, what's his mom? I mean, that conversation, Luke, that you were just talking about, the reporters are talking to his mom, and his mom saying, "Here's why he's so good. He knows he's not his scorecard. Like he knows he's not what you know his last round of golf was." And it allows him to perform with something more than a skill set. It's skill that is grounded in identity that lives from authority. It's real power that he's working with. In our world, I'd say, there should be something supernatural about your life and leadership, something that can't just be explained by your skill set, so to speak. And then also living with wisdom and leading with wisdom. And this is what I think you see in Jesus's leadership. They're astounded by the authority that he has, the wisdom that he has, the power that he has. And so the things we're going to talk about today are things that sabotage us as leaders from actually leading with wisdom and power and defaulting back to just normal business leaders, which lead with, knowledge and skill, which is fine. It's better than ignorance and incompetence. I'm just saying we should be leading from an unfair advantage,
So
and we
good.
often aren't.
Yeah, so good, so helpful. Well, here's what I'd like to do. Can you just jump into the tool and kind of give us an introduction of kind of the tool, and then we'll circle back and give some questions and kind of just do some teaching and questions. And for those of you who are watching live, if you've got questions, just throw those in the chat at any point, and we'll kind of let Dave answer some of those questions and walk through this together.
Yeah, like you said, this is a tool that's been really helpful for me. It continues to be helpful for me. And I hope it'll be helpful for other people. It was introduced to me at 3DM by Mike Breen, is the kind of founding of the tool kind of piece. But we've built a lot on it with the things that I'm going to share with you today. Now, part of this, we're talking about living with wisdom and power. It'd be awesome if our leadership happened in a bubble. The truth is, it happens in the middle of a battle. So there are forces that are trying to sabotage us. And so, where I want to ground this is in Luke chapter 4 with Jesus's journey to the wilderness. And in the wilderness, he faces three temptations that I want to suggest to you are the same temptations that took down Adam and Eve. They're the same temptations that you see all throughout the Old Testament. And Satan's not remarkably creative, but he is amazingly effective. Same three temptations that I think we face today. So in Luke chapter 4, Jesus has just gone through the waters of baptism. The Father said, "This is my Son whom I love, and him I'm well pleased." He comes out of the waters of baptism, and he is full of the Holy Spirit, and he's guided by the Spirit as we get to Luke chapter 4, verse 1. If you go down to verse 14, he comes out of the wilderness in the power of the Spirit. So he goes into the wilderness full of the Holy Spirit, guided by the Holy Spirit, but he comes out of the wilderness in the power of the Spirit. All the miracle stories of Jesus happen on the backside of the wilderness. So this is about, what we're talking about, wisdom and power. It's about how do we live with more power in our lives in a good way. I know not power in a bad way, not in an overpowering way, but power in a good way. And I want to suggest to you, it really comes back to this time in the wilderness. So I'm not going to read the passage there. You can read it for yourself. I'm just going to summarize it because we're trying to do this on a time frame as quickly as we possibly can. But Jesus goes into the wilderness, and the Bible says he hasn't eaten for 40 days. And I love the way that Scripture talks about it. And at the end of the 40 days, he's hungry. I think that's the biggest understatement in the entire Bible. He hasn't eaten for 40 days, he's a little hungry. I don't eat for 4 hours and I'm famished, right? So he hasn't eaten. He's in a weak position. And Satan comes to him. And the first temptation that Satan does is he says, "I want you to turn these stones into bread." So I'm going to give you the grid here that we're going to walk through these three temptations with Jesus. We call these things life drifts, three life drifts. And the first life drift that we see is around the issues of appetite. And appetite is really around need and satisfaction. He hasn't eaten for 40 days. He's a little bit hungry. Turn these stones into bread. What's the temptation for Jesus? Here's the temptation. Jesus, you need to become your own provider. You can't really trust your Father to provide for you. So you need to take all your needs into your own hands, and you need to satisfy your need. And Jesus says, man doesn't live by bread alone. In other words, what he's saying is, I'm going to choose to believe that my Father is good and my Father will give me everything I need, that my Father is my provider. So the first kind of place that we wrestle with as leaders, and this is all the internal grid that affects our external world, is around issues of appetite. And the question is, do we need to become our own providers? And with all of these drifts, there are slippery slopes on both sides of the mountain. So the person who deals with greed and the person who has a poverty mentality both have an appetite issue. One is, I got to have more, 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 more. The other is, I can't have anything. And these issues of appetite are things that oftentimes drive us to make decisions that are not filled with power or wisdom and end up sabotaging us. The second temptation, Satan takes Jesus up and he shows him all the kingdoms of the world. And he says, if you'll just bow the knee to me, you can have them. What's the temptation for Jesus? And the second temptation, it's temptations around ambition. And the temptation for Jesus is you can have the kingdom without the cross, Jesus. You can take a shortcut because Jesus, it's interesting, doesn't argue with Satan. Satan says, I'm in control of all these places, and Jesus doesn't argue with him. He's saying, I can make you, in charge of all these places, and you won't have to go through the cross. And when we talk about ambition, it's about getting to a justified end by any means necessary. And I can't tell you how many times in my life my ambition sabotages my leadership because I'm a guy who likes to win. I like to get things done, and just cut a corner here, cut a corner there. It's the right end, and therefore the end justifies the means. And before you know it, there's a wake of damage that's coming out of my leadership because my ambition is sabotaging. Now, again, the issues of ambition are really around weakness and strength. I don't like being weak. I like to be strong. And if I'm not careful, ambition can sabotage my life. Now, again, slippery slope on both sides of the mountain here. So the person who's a workaholic and the person who's apathetic both have an ambition issue. And oftentimes, Satan will just, take you from one side of the mountain to the other one. So it's like, you know what? I like to win. I like to make things happen. But if I feel like I can't win, then I'm just not going to care. I'm just going to go, numb out somewhere. I'm just going to turn the carer off. And it doesn't matter. Satan doesn't care which side of the mountain or which ditch that I'm in. He'll actually take me from one to the other as a way of me trying to deal with it. But I find myself stuck in both gutters from time to time. So the second temptation here is around ambition in regard to weakness and strength. And Jesus doesn't bend the knee here. It says worship God and him only. And again, for me in particular, in regard to ambition, it's really this sense of, wanting to feel unlimited. And there's only one person who's unlimited, and that's God himself. And so, that's why worship is such an important part here. When I'm unhealthy in my ambition, it's really me trying to be my own God. And Jesus says, no, no, we're not going to live that way. Finally, last temptation for Jesus is around approval. Satan takes him up to the highest point in the temple, says, throw yourself down from here, and it's going to be great. People will love you. And Jesus doesn't do that. What's the temptation here for Jesus? The temptation I would suggest to you is Satan saying, become the Messiah everyone wants you to be, rather than the misunderstood Redeemer that the Father's calling you to be. Just be who they want you to be, Jesus. And again, the slippery slope on both sides or the gutters on both sides, rejection and acceptance. So the person who needs everyone's affirmation and the person who says, I don't care what you think about me, both have an approval issue. And again, Jesus says, do not put the Lord your God to the test. It's interesting, just to give you, and then we'll take a break and you guys can interact here for a moment. It's interesting here because these same temptations that Jesus faces, I want to suggest, sabotage Adam and Eve. It's an appetite, ambition, approval. Genesis chapter 1, when they saw the tree was good for food, that's the appetite, and profitable for gaining knowledge, that's the ambition piece. They wanted to be like God. They forgot that they were made in God's image. That's the approval piece. This is Genesis, 3, where the first Adam fails. And Jesus here now, as the second Adam, prevails in this moment. This is Israel's story. You go through every person in the Bible, you look at Jacob, it's an ambition issue. You look at Esau, it's an appetite issue. But in Psalm chapter 106, talking about the whole story of Israel, it says, in the desert, they gave into their cravings. That's the appetite piece. In the wasteland, they put their God to the test. That's the approval thing. So this isn't just a Jesus thing. I want to suggest to you as an Adam and Eve thing. It's an all Old Testament thing, and it's a us thing. So when you look at these three life drifts, there's probably one of them where you're like, I don't really struggle too much there. There's probably one where you're like, yeah, I can see some issues. And there's probably one that has blinking red lights on. It's like, man, that's my issue. For me, that really comes back to ambition. Now, I'll tell you a little bit more here in just a little bit about how I medicate that unhealthily and what it looks like to go to the cross with that so that I can live with wisdom and power. But for me, that ambition piece is huge. So let me just stop there, Ben. There's a couple other things that we're going to put on this, but I want to at least stop there to just kind of take a break in the teaching.
So good, Dave. This is so helpful. I think this is so important. This is one of the most important conversations I think we can have with leaders, because I think every one of us can identify people who we either know and love or stories that we've heard where one of these three temptations has derailed leaders that had the capacity for so much kingdom impact, the capacity for so much impact in the business world and in the market, like who had the ability to go very far, and one of these things derailed him. I'm wondering, could you give us like a practical, like real world example? We don't have to, I'm not saying like name names. Let's not put real people on these, but just like for each of these, ambition, appetite, approval, what does that look like for leaders that you've seen or experienced derail their ministries or derail their leadership or derail their companies because of these kinds of things?
Yeah, I mean, well, this gets into the second part of what I was going to go into is that oftentimes the presenting issue in our lives isn't the core issue of our lives.
Yes.
So, unfortunately, instead of going to the cross with these issues in my life, I usually have a tendency to medicate with one of the other things. So, for instance, for me, so I won't pick on anyone else, ambition is at the core of who I am. But if I feel like I'm losing, then instead of going to Jesus with that, my tendency is to medicate that through appetite or approval. So if I feel like I'm losing, then I just need to find some people to tell me how good I am. Or I'm going face first into a cheese dip somewhere because at least I can win on that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I'm medicating with either appetite or approval to the real issues that are ambition. My wife, she's more on the approval end of these things. But if she feels like she's being rejected, then she might double click into ambition, which is go do a bunch of stuff so people will like you.
Yes.
Or, we're going to meet at that cheese. Actually, it probably won't be a cheese dip, but if she feels like she's being rejected and I feel like I'm not winning, we better not be near a car lot because we're going to buy something we
Get
don't
that Range
need.
Rover, buddy.
Yeah, we're gonna buy something we don't need, trying to medicate what's really going on in our lives. And
So
so what
good.
happens for us as leaders is we find ourselves oftentimes, most of the guys that I've counseled that are in affairs, it's not actually an appetite issue. They're medicating an approval thing or an ambition thing through the affair that is, tapping into their appetites. But the kind of soul work is to say, what's the thing behind the thing?
That's so
And
good.
my tendency as a leader is to double down, chasing the triangle all around rather than going to Jesus with these things.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
know I've heard you teach before that all of we have all of these in our life. So it's
Right.
not like any of us are exempt from any of these challenges. And in different seasons, they bubble up in different ways. And there's a real but there are some that stand out more. So for me, I am always seeking approval, but the way I get approval is through ambition. And
Yeah.
so it's that old, like when I was in high school and I scored 25 points on a Friday night, everybody loved me.
Right.
I scored 3 points, they didn't. When
Mhm.
you miss the winning shot or you miss four free throws or whatever that thing is. And so I just learned to like chase approval through ambition and through success, which is a terrible way to live when you're trying to run a
Right.
company or you're trying to build something significant. And it becomes this. And so there does have to be that level of self-awareness to dig into
Right.
this. Luke, when you look at this, what do you see in your life?
Let's not talk about my life.
Mhm.
No, man, look, it's all there. Like you said, we all have all of those pieces. And the you were talking about better not be near a car lot. I'm probably prey to that one too, Dave, where I'm
Mhm.
like, nothing's working. It's a tough week, or I'm having a frustrating moment. I can't get my head into it. And it's like, I just need to distract myself, right? I
Mhm.
need to, go buy something or go play a round of golf. Sometimes there's this line, right, where some of this can feel like therapeutic and some of
Mhm.
it can be good. Like sometimes, if that's the case, maybe what I
Right.
really do need is I need to go walk 9 holes by myself, throw my bag on my back, and just enjoy it and sort of like get out of the work for a minute. That's a different thing though than like medicating. What and
Mhm.
how does a leader, Dave, identify those lines? Like, how do we start to know I'm creating a backlog? I'm thinking of like a pipe that's clogged. Like,
Mhm.
I'm like robbing Peter to pay Paul everywhere in my life with appetite, ambition, and approval. I got all this kind of stuff, and I'm just like, shuffling things around to keep the persona up, to
Mhm.
keep things afloat. How do I begin to like what's the anecdote
Yeah.
for that? And how do I know if the things I'm doing are actual levers to solve the core issues, or
Right.
it's like suppression or just
Numbing
distraction
and
or,
hiding, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
ill
Yeah.
medication, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the true thing is that with all of these things, you know, they're neutral until they go wrong. Like, so like there's nothing wrong with an appetite. Like you eat because you have an appetite, but it can become something that sabotages. There's nothing wrong with good, healthy ambition, but ambition can go sideways. There's nothing wrong with having approval. We do, we want God's approval, all those things. So the question that, you're asking there, Luke, really boils down to, I think, re-gospeling our heart. I'll show you in a moment just how the gospel plays into this, but basically the gospel takes the stinger out of all the stuff that really wants to sabotage me. So maybe this is a great place just to go back to just add a little bit of teaching here, and then we can come
Yeah.
back to the piece here. But
Yeah.
if
Jump
you
in,
if you
Dave.
look at these things in regard to the temptations, Jesus resists these things in the desert, and it determines the power in which he lives his life and the way that he leads. What I want to suggest to you, the good news is what Jesus resists in the desert, he defeats at the cross. And if what he resists in the desert determines the power with which he can live, then what he defeats at the cross determines the power with which we can live. So let's go to each one of these and see what the gospel says. Well, at the cross, Jesus becomes needy. The way that Jesus defeats these things is he becomes it and takes the stinger out of it. He becomes needy. He can't even get himself a glass of water. But in his need, here's the gospel, I find my satisfaction. So much so that one of the writers in the Bible would say, everything we need, Peter would say, for a life of godliness, we already have in Christ. So, I don't have to lean into meeting my own needs because Jesus at the cross has defeated and taken the stinger out of that for me, so that literally the gospel says everything I need for a life of godliness is already in me in the power of the Holy Spirit. He just defeats it by becoming. At the cross, Jesus is rejected. That's the approval stuff. But in his rejection, I find my acceptance. So I don't have to work for approval. I can work from approval. The writer of Hebrews says, I can come now boldly into the throne room of God as a son or daughter of God because of what Jesus did at the cross. So he just takes the stinger out of it. At the cross, Jesus becomes weak. He dies. You can't get any weaker than that. But what's Paul say? He says, I can now glory in my weakness because when I am made weak, I am now strong. This is the power of the gospel to say, you know what? Everything that I struggle with in here, Jesus took upon himself. And the gospel is, I don't have to find my identity through those things anymore. I get my identity from God, and therefore I can live in a healthy way with appetite, ambition, and approval. But it requires me re-gospeling my heart, me re-hearing the gospel that God is my provider, that there are things worth winning at. And things that are important, but I am not whether I win or lose on those things. That my approval is already there because of what Jesus has done. So I don't have to work for it. I can work from my approval. And so for me, Luke, just in regard to answering the question, part of the personal self-awareness work is really saying, okay, what does the gospel have to say about where I'm at right now? And instead of medicating, how can I rehear the gospel so that I can live with wisdom and power in my life?
So helpful, Dave. So talk to me about what you've seen happen in teams and organizations when this stuff starts being named, like these shadow things start being raised to the surface versus hidden, and talk about just the power of, like, there's a power of awareness, right?
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
able to name
recognition.
it, but there's another power when I'm able to not just see it, but I'm able to
Right.
name it and have authority over it. Talk to us a little
Yeah.
bit about that.
Well, I mean, I would say all of the Christian life in regard to this comes down to two things. One, recognition and recovery rate. So, I mean, when I was coaching
Great.
soccer players, you're going to make mistakes. The question, great players, it's not about are you going to make mistakes or not? It's about how quick you recover, right? And so, recognition is saying, okay, what are my tendencies to medicate? How long am I going down that road? And then do I recognize it and then gospel my heart? So it doesn't, what used to sabotage me 6 years now might sabotage me 60 seconds.
It's great.
So it's never going to be perfect. But what I can do through self-awareness is recognize it. But then the second piece is recovery rate. How quickly can I get back into a gospel mindset that sets me free from what is trying to capture my heart in this moment? And so I would just say what I would coach into is recognition of your broken patterns. We all have broken patterns. My broken pattern is usually, I mean, I have many, but one of the major ones is ambition to appetite or ambition to approval. And here's what that looks like in my life. If I feel like I'm not losing, I'm not winning, I'm gonna turn the carer off. I'm gonna numb out and probably use an appetite to numb.
Mhm.
So the question is, can I recognize that? And then can I break that pattern through the power of the gospel, not through self-will or anything like that, through the power of the gospel, saying, no, how do I trust that even my weakness, I can be strong because of what Jesus did? And how do I not use appetites to numb, but use appetite as what they're meant to be, which is a celebration of God's provision in my life?
Dave, from a Christian standpoint, is there any way around the core of this that doesn't sort of start and end with an identity question? Because like what you just said,
Yeah.
my recovery rate is very quick,
Yeah.
but a lot of folks can have a quick recovery rate because they have maybe good practices or good habits or good mindfulness or mindsets. But again, like you just said, it comes from willpower or
Right.
self-will, which almost is sort of like an exacerbation of the issue to begin with,
Hmm.
versus a laying down of, versus a core identity kind of rootedness. What's
Hmm.
the like tension point there for leaders who sort of are connected to Jesus and have a gospel heart versus
Hmm.
those who don't, and can you continue to hold up the facade, if you will, if you don't?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the facade will always break down. It's just a matter of when. And I think, but there are practices that we can do that actually engage us in a positive way of life. So, like, remember, approval comes from God. So it's how am I sitting in a relationship with God and hearing His words upon my life in a regular way. Provision in regard to appetite, if you look at the New Testament, is always met through community. No one's in need because of communities around them. So, like your appetite issues, this is why Bandit is so powerful because, as a startup, you don't, it doesn't feel like you have much resources all the time, but the power of a community reassures you in a way that when you're on your own and you're thinking, I got to provide for myself, that you're not reassured. And then mission is about ambition. It's about how do I focus toward the things that ultimately matter, not just winning, but winning at the right things. That the answer to ambition is about losing. It's not about losing. It's about winning at the right things, the things that truly matter. So I would just say, personal time with God, a community of people, and mission that is alive. These are the practices as leaders that we want to put at the forefront of our lives because it keeps us from being, trapped in the broken cycles.
That's good.
Let me, can I go a little bit deeper here, Ben? And then like,
Come on,
just,
buddy.
just if it's okay, just one more
Going.
round
Yeah.
because this is really some of the self work that I think is important because we look at the core motivators on each of these things when we're able to do this and really the core lies that often sabotage us. So in regard to appetite, the core issue is fear. And fear manifests in some form of a lie that says, I'll never have enough. Um, In regard to ambition, the core issue is guilt. So I win and then I feel guilty afterwards because I cut all these corners. Um, and the lie, the core lie in our lives is around I'll never accomplish enough. And then in regard to approval, it's shame. And the core lie of shame in regard to approval is I'll never be enough. So I'll never have enough. I'll never accomplish enough. I'll never be enough. And again, what happens when I chase the triangle is this becomes a big ball of thread that's all tangled. Again, for me, here's the way that I can catastrophize my life in about 30 seconds. I'm, you know, I've got a startup business too. I'm starting it up and things aren't going well. And I feel guilty for it not going as well as it should. I mean, I can tell you every day I come home from work, and if I'm not careful, I don't think about all the things that I got done today. What do I think about? All the things that I didn't get done today, and I start feeling guilty for that. Then, if I'm not careful, I go over to appetite to try and medicate, and guilt turns into fear very quickly. Man, we could go out of business. That's not so. Now I'm in fear, and then I'll click into shame, which is that'll be embarrassing. So in about 30 seconds, on my way home from work, I've catastrophized. I'm caught in guilt, shame, and fear rather than the gospel. And all of a sudden, I'm in a really unhealthy place, making unhealthy decisions that are continuing to sabotage my life because these lies of I'll never accomplish enough, I'll never have enough, and therefore I'll never be enough become the core motivations of my life rather than what God kind of points us to. So guilt, shame, and fear start to manifest, and we start to catastrophize, which usually means that we get into a cycle of fantasizing and surviving rather than dreaming and planning. That's not good for our organization. That's not good for us as people. And we just get taken out of the game, and we're living at most with knowledge and skill, but not really living with wisdom and power. And it just ends up sabotaging the potential of our leadership. Again, I don't want to project that on anyone. I'm just telling you my stuff. All right.
Well, I think you're saying stuff that is so highly resonant. I'm sitting here going like, oh my gosh, I've gone down that rabbit hole so many times. I've
Mhm.
so quick and easy to spiral, right?
Right.
And you're right. Like do it on the drive home. You do it. There's times like sitting in the driveway, and it's like before I
Mhm.
walk in the house, it's like, man, how do I go put a brave face on for my wife and kids when I feel like I kind of like I've been beat up today or this week, and I don't feel like I'm enough. I don't feel like I'm capable. I'm worried about the future, but I can't like let that
Yep.
carry over into the threshold of the house. And oftentimes the reality is it does, right?
Mhm.
Try to
Yep.
psych myself out of that,
Mhm.
but it's going to. Or there's this alternative, right? Which is like you rooted all of those things, and hey, these are lies. These are things you're
Right.
beginning to believe.
Right.
Uh, and so, what's the opposite of the lie, right? And to
Right.
kind of go back to how do I re-gospel my heart and say, well, then what's actually true here?
Right.
Funny enough, just the other day, I was listening to a podcast, guys, with Jamie Winship, and I know both of you know Jamie,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he's talking about this very issue, and he's like he's teaching Jamie, incredible author, teacher, leads a great organization, talks a lot about identity. I wrote a book called Living Fearlessly. Check it out. And he's like just a few weeks ago or whatever it was, he's speaking to a room full of 50 like state school superintendents. Like he's like, I have no business in this room talking about these like gospel oriented things that I am, but I'm invited in this room. And it's like, well, how am I going to do this? Right. So he says, I very simply just say to this room of 50 people, hey, do you ever hear a voice? I just want to see a raise of hands. If you hear a voice that says anything that sounds like this. And it was literally these three statements. I wrote them,
Mhm.
the ones that you just said.
Mhm.
I'm not enough. I'll never be. I can't get enough done. Right. I
Mhm.
won't accomplish enough. I'll never have enough. I'll never earn enough. I'm not educated enough. I don't have what it takes to lead that
Right.
complex of an organization or that large of a team or how to solve that level of conflict. Do you hear those voices? And he's like, 50 hands go up. Literally every person's like, yeah.
Mhm.
And he goes, great. Now we've established that we all hear voices. We all hear that voice. And I would
Mhm.
propose to you that that's the voice of an antagonist in your life. and that's the voice of an enemy in your life. And I would propose that there's another voice that is also speaking and you are not hearing. And I know how to hear that voice really, really well. And I want to teach you how to hear that voice, the one that tells truths about your life, so that you can turn down the noise on that other voice that's telling you a bunch of lies about your life.
Right.
Would you like to hear how to learn? And he's like 50 hands going.
Mm.
It's like we don't know that voice.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
how do we do that, Dave? How like jump into Jamie's thoughts process there a little bit? Like, what does it mean to tap into the truth on the other side of these lies?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's articulating that really well in regard to the battle that we find ourselves in. And it is continuing to rehearse, what God has to say about each of these things. So in regard to approval, hey, you work from it. And what would I do if I, believe that in regard to I mean, we just went through a really tough second quarter, and it's the self the kind of self-talk that's saying, you know what? I'm going to trust as if God has my back on it. I'm going to make decisions. I'm not going to make decisions as a leader out of a poverty mentality or a greed mentality. I'm going to trust God is going to give us what we need. Now, I also know he's remarkably creative. So I always think A plus B equals C, but he's got D, E, F, and G out there. And honestly, I thank him for some of these times that we go through difficulty because it sparks my innovation. Like it helps me see how innovative he is and how creative he is. It's not just an A plus B equals C game that he's playing. And now I can face difficult financial moments because I've seen him bring in D and L and G that I had no idea were out there. And it may not be exactly what I thought it was going to be, but it's providing really the room to innovate because, I'm feeling the pressure on the finances over there. In regard to ambition, it's trusting the long game, not the short game, and saying, in the long game, we will win. Right now, it might feel like we're losing. But right now, I mean, the things that God's put in our heart, oftentimes, even like a vision, has to go through a death and a resurrection.
Yeah.
And I got to trust the death of the vision into the resurrection of the vision as a leader. So for me, I'm boiling all that down to one thing. And here's my one question. It's my one, like, big, if I could pass any discipline on to someone as a leader, it'd be this. It's when you find yourself in the middle of all those voices, ask yourself this question: what would a secure person do?
Hmm.
When I ask that question, almost all the time, the ambiguity goes away, and I know exactly what a secure. The reason I don't know what to do is I'm so in my insecurities. But if I just ask the question, what would a secure person who knows that they're approved of by God, that God's going to give them everything that they need, and that they're going to really be part of the things that count, what would that person do? I almost always know what to do, and I try and do that. Even if I don't feel that way, I try and do what the answer to what would a secure person do, and it's almost always clear.
So
That's
good.
really good. In that
So
podcast,
helpful.
Jamie says, when I ask why, I almost never hear answers.
Mhm.
I say, God, what do you want me to learn from this?
Mhm.
Funny. He always has some answer, and it's almost never the one that I thought it would be.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the what, like, man, what would a secure person do? And man, who's the most secure person that we all have
Right,
access to?
right.
It's the person of Jesus.
Pretend like you're that person.
Yeah,
Yeah. Like, so literally, what would the most secure person, man, the most secure person is
yeah.
Jesus. And
And
boy, what did he know? He knew where his identity was. He knew the heart of the Father. Like, you know where I'll go? I'll go where the Father wants me to go. You know what I'll look at? I'll look at what the Father
right,
wants me to look at. You know what I'll, you know, sing for or look for approval from? The Father only, right? And
absolutely.
I'm going to stay rooted there. And in the midst of all these fears, I'm going to go, you know what? His grace is sufficient.
Yeah,
So
I
that
mean,
core realities that if we have them, if we do, it's there. It's, do we know them? Do we have access to our life? Do we have the habits, the practices, the capability to come back to the rock solid
yeah.
core and start and end there, right?
Yeah, and part of that is because Christians, we sometimes accept Jesus as our Savior, but we don't follow him as a rabbi. And what I mean by that is Jesus, all the things you're talking about there, Luke, he shows, I mean, Paul says he's the second Adam. He shows us what it truly looks like to be human. And Jesus is the most productive person who's ever lived. I mean, the reason the disciples follow Jesus is not because he's the best teacher they know. Literally, he's the best baker they know. He's the best bartender they know. He's the best at everything. Like he's the most productive person who ever has lived. And I think he's a great person for us as leaders to take our cue from if we want to be productive because he's the most truly human person. And so the gospel isn't about just saving us from our sins. It's about reclaiming what it means to be truly human when God created us again to live with productivity, to live with flourishing fulfillment and faithfulness in our lives. And Jesus is our model for those things. And it's because he didn't let these three things sabotage him. I love it. I mean, this is again the gospel. Paul says, he who knew no sin became sin so that we could become the righteousness of God. He defeats these things by becoming them in his death, and in his resurrection. He creates a new kind of power, so much so that Paul says, the same power that raised Christ from the dead is now available to us. So I truly believe Christians should be the most productive people on the planet. Again, we're not fighting fair. We're not just leveraging knowledge and skill. We should be knowledge plus revelation. That's wisdom. Skill plus authority from identity. That's power. We should be the most productive people on the planet, and we should be the most secure people who, like we go back to Scotty Scheffler, no, we're not our scorecard, we're not our
Yep.
bottom line, and God's going to continue to provide so we can continue to step out in faith because honestly, I'm not the result of my company.
So
That's
good,
good.
Dave.
Ben, I
I
have one
want
more
to I
thought,
want
then
to
I want to
move
throw it
us
over to you.
to
Oh, I'm sorry.
I want to move us towards some practical things, Dave, as we wrap up here. Uh, one of the things that our buddy Chris Brooks talks
Mhm.
about is the idea of a sacred wound. That every time you stand up to lead, whether you're leading a team meeting or you're on a Zoom call like this, or there, whatever, you're having a one-on-one with an employee, there's a sacred wound that you carry with you into that meeting. There's, which probably is ambition, appetite, or approval that you're
Right.
carrying with you. And so one of the things that I've done is, and this is something that I would encourage everybody to do, is what is that truth that you need to remind yourself of every time you're standing in that leadership gap? And so the truth that I need to be reminded of over and over again, because like I said earlier, I have an approval issue that leads me to ambition. And so the thing that I need to be reminded of, and the phrase that I pray every time I stand up before I teach, before I step into any kind of anxiety around being a leader, or where I'm worried about, I don't know if I can pull this off, or this room feels too big for me, or whatever those things are, the phrase that I repeat to myself is, "You are a beloved son of the Most High God who has nothing to prove and nothing to earn today." And that's just the phrase that I will repeat over and over and over again. And it comes so natural to me because it's the truth that I need to hear, is that I'm beloved, whether this turns out the way I want it to or not, that I have nothing to earn in this moment because I've already earned all my approval through Jesus, that I have nothing to prove in this moment because he already receives me and accepts me as I am. So that's what you're talking about when you say re-gospeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
If there's a leader watching today who's naming, like, oh man, this is my challenge, this is my drift, this is my trap, what's the first courageous step you would encourage them to step into that's practical for them to work through that?
Yeah. I mean, so much of it is, don't short circuit the recognition process. Like just know what your brokenness looks like. Like start unwinding that ball of thread if you haven't unwound that ball of thread. And I can tell you, if you don't know what it is, ask your spouse. They'll tell you exactly what it is, right? So if you're like, I just don't know, I honestly just do a little 360 around you because probably everyone around you um, is 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 aware of what your brokenness looks like. They just haven't told you because you haven't asked them. But if you ask them, oftentimes they will. So one is just kind of starting on the work that you guys do, which is a lot of that self-awareness work, and then getting some outside eyes to help you with that. And then I think it is in light of naming your brokenness, say, what does the gospel say to that? And exactly what you were saying, Ben, how do I rehearse that in my mind so that I'm fighting from that engine. For me, that gospel looks like, I don't have to fight for victory. I can fight from victory.
Mhm.
So because I know we're already going to win. I don't know how we're going to win yet, but I know we're going to win. I mean, I've lost it all probably two or three times in regard to companies that I'm leading, but I've been through that death enough and seen the resurrection to the other side of it that I don't have to be afraid of losing anymore. If I lost it all tomorrow, I would trust that the death would produce a resurrection of something that was better than I could dream. So it's about, I can lead today from victory, not for victory, which is going to give me the courage to fight and the need to say, you know what? I don't have to make it happen and I don't have to provide everything for it to happen. God's going to give me daily bread. He may not give me yearly bread, but he's going to give me daily bread and we will have enough to accomplish that. If I can rehearse that in my head, that's the first steps. But you can't really rehearse that gospel till you know how deep what your brokenness looks like.
Yeah, it's great. Any final thought, Dave? Just, hey, I want to leave leaders with this one thing. What would you say to a bunch of business owners who are like, man, we want to follow Jesus in the way that we lead. We don't want to transmit our pain and our brokenness. We want to transform our companies.
Yeah.
What would be the last piece of advice you'd give? This has
Yeah.
been so great, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, the way this manifest, I mean, I'll just do the church thing real quick because, this has been so important for me as a leader. I asked Mike when because he was from England. He said these three things: appetite, ambition, approval, manifest differently in different cultures. I said, well, you're from England. Kind of diagnose our society, and he says, well, in American society, appetite manifests as consumerism. Everyone's got to have more, 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 and more. He said. Ambition manifests as unhealthy competition. It's not just enough for me to win. I actually want you to lose. I mean, why is it that when my friends' books sell, like why is it that I cheer for them not to? Like what is that? That's a deep, dark, kind of hole. So it's this sense of unhealthy competition. And then in regard to approval, it's about, uh,
Celebrity.
celebrity. Yeah, everyone wanted to be famous rather than wanting to be known. And so when I look at the world that I work in, which is the church, how much of my work, how much of church was built on consumerism, competition, and celebrity? And the big aha for me was I realized even with the best intentions of the world, um, I was building on my brokenness rather than on the gospel. So like I wanted to be the biggest thing in town. That's the kind of competition piece. Get a bunch of consumers, become a celebrity. That's the way you do that. I realized the demons aren't just in me. The demons are in the system.
Mm.
And you know to recognize, okay, if our world is built on those kinds of things, how much of our businesses are built on our own personal brokenness, even with the best intentions in the world, rather than the gospel. And so, what must I resist to build my business Jesus's way that actually is filled because Jesus's way gets filled with Jesus's power? And am I content to run a business without the power of God? Or do I actually want to work in a different kind of way that demonstrates the power of God and has different results because I'm not just playing by the same system that everybody else plays by? So I would just ask you to think about that because the demons aren't just in us, the demons are in the system. And as Christian leaders, whether it's church world or business world, I want to suggest to you there's a different way to do things. It's a better way to do things. It produces supernatural results and it can be learned. But you can't. You're going to need to be part of a community, and that's what you guys are doing at Banded. Is trying to create these communities to help us relearn these ways of life that we actually believe are supernaturally productive.
So good, bud. I'm so thankful for you. Thankful to call you friend.
Yeah,
Thankful for the
me
wisdom
too.
you brought today, man. This is a conversation that I think every leader needs to hear and needs to dive into. It's one that's close to my heart, and this teaching has really transformed a lot of the ways that I lead. And so, thanks, Dave, for being here. Thanks everybody for joining us. I hope you guys have an amazing weekend. I hope you enjoy the British Open. I hope you get outside a little bit, enjoy the summer, and get some rest with your family today. Luke, any final thoughts for us?
No, man, loved it. Appreciate it. And excited to join you guys next month for another roundtable.
Yeah. Thanks,
Thanks for
everybody.
having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Okay.
Dave.
Thanks, guys.
It's great.
Wait.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate it, Dave.
absolutely. Anything
Thanks.
else